The Oak Ridge Reservation holds an important place in our nation's history, and it continues to be a vital part of our national security and scientific research community. But parts of the reservation require cleanup as a result of decades of energy research. The U.S. Department of Energy looks to the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board as the voice of the community on environmental issues. You're welcome to attend meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board to learn more. Call us or visit our website.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 2013 meeting of the Site-Specific Advisory Board. Tonight, we have a presentation on development of properties in East Tennessee, and next month, our meeting will be April 10th here at the Information Center. And the topic at this time is environmental management portfolio plans. If during this meeting there's a need to leave this facility, have an exit to my right there and behind me. Members of staff will also direct if need be. At this time, I'd like to ask Ms. Gaines to please welcome our new members.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I know that we have two new members that are joining us on an interim basis, and I want to introduce them. First is Ms. Belinda Price. There's Belinda. Hello. Belinda is a senior hydrologist with Alliant Corporation, where she's been employed for about the past 18 months or so. She has more than 25 years experience in environmental investigation and environmental remediation as a geologist, hydrologist, and project manager. Belinda received her bachelor's degree in geology from the University of Bristol in the UK and her master's in hydrology from the University of London. She's a certified professional geologist in several states, and she is a member of the Geological Society of America and the East Tennessee Geological Society. And Brenda lives in Knoxville. So welcome to the Site-Specific Advisory Board.
Thank you.
And our second newest member is Mr. Bob Craig. Welcome, Bob. Bob is retired from the MSc Technology Applications, where he served as regional vice president until March of 2012. He's been involved in investigating, evaluating, and managing environmental issues on the Oak Ridge Reservation for more than 35 years. Bob received his bachelor's and master's degrees in zoology and his PhD in ecology from the University of California. He's the secretary of the Y-12 Federal Credit Union Board of Directors and is a member of the Audubon Society, the World Wildlife Fund, and the National Wildlife Federation. And Bob lives in Oak Ridge.
Yes.
So welcome to you as well, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, you got anything else for us tonight?
I do. I do. I wanted to talk just for a few moments about the financial or budget situation for us here in Oak Ridge, and a little bit about sequestration, just to bring everybody up to date. So I know everybody is aware and has been hearing about and reading in the papers about sequestration. I thought I might just take a moment and talk about how it's impacted the environmental management program here in Oak Ridge. As most of you know, and we've talked about this in the past, the environmental cleanup program here in Oak Ridge is funded by two separate funds. One we refer to as the Uranium Enrichment D&D Fund, Decontamination and Demolition Fund, or D&D Fund for short, and the other is referred to as defense funds. And those two funds are used to do all the cleanup on the reservation. So in accordance with the requirements, we have received a 5% reduction of our D&D funds and a 7.5% reduction of our defense funds. Basically, the D&D funds are used to clean up the East Tennessee Technology Park, and the defense funds are used to perform all of our other activities on the reservation. As far as what that means in terms of impacts, these reductions were taken on our 2012 funding levels because we, of course, do not have an appropriation for 2013. We're currently operating under what's called a continuing resolution. So the cuts were based on the amount of money that we were allocated in 2012. Basically, the reduction in defense funds has had minimal impact to our activities here on the reservation. That assumes that we'll be allowed to do a little bit of internal reprogramming within the defense fund area, which we believe we're going to be allowed to do, but we don't really see any significant impacts to the activities that are being performed or their schedule. Where we do see some impacts is in the D&D area or the cleanup of the East Tennessee Technology Park. And that's because our 2012 funding level in that arena for cleanup was projected to be $20 million less than what we had in our president's budget for 2013. So we're taking a cut off of an amount of money that's lower than what we planned for to have in 2013. So this will impact our cleanup schedule for our K-25 project and our K-27 project. We are still working with UCOR, our contractor, to determine what exactly those impacts will be, but we've projected that it could result in as much as a delay of 1 year in cleanup progress. And of course, it also will result, because we have less money, in some reductions, although not nearly as much as what we're reading about with regard to other DOE sites. So overall, in Oak Ridge, we're faring much better than some of the other sites, and although there are some impacts, they're not nearly as severe as what they could have been or what we originally were anticipating. So that's it, just a summary.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Adler, you have any comments for us this evening?
No, I don't have anything to add tonight. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Let's go to John Owsley, our TDEC liaison.
Thank you, sir. I have no announcements, but would be glad to attempt to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Sure. Ms. Jones, EPA.
Thank you. I also do not have any specific announcements to make, but as John stated, I'll be more than happy to try to answer questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see, is there any, no comments on that? We open the public comment period now.
The public comment period is now open, and we don't have anyone signed up. So are there any other members of the public who want to comment? All right, so as a Citizens Advisory Board of the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOE as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website.
Okay, thank you very much there. Before we turn this over to David to introduce our speaker for the night, please remember that we like to give our speakers the opportunity to get through their presentations. At the end of presentations, if you have a question, use your name tent to indicate, and we'll be happy to entertain questions as long as we can. After the board members have asked their questions and made their comments, we'll open up to the public. So, David, would you please introduce our speaker for this evening?
I can do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight's presentation is the environmental management's approach to contracting, which will be done by Barbara Jackson. Barbara is the director of the DOE Procurement and Contracts Division. She is responsible for administering more than $3 billion in procurement and financial assistance awards at DOE's Oak Ridge office and managing the Oak Ridge office's small business program. The Procurement and Contracts Division handles approximately 800 contract actions annually in the Oak Ridge Integrated Support Center, servicing multiple programs, including science, EM, nuclear fuels, energy efficiency, security, and the DOE's National Laboratory Site offices. The second portion of the presentation will be the transfer and development of properties at East Tennessee Technology Park. Mr. Brian Henry will be doing that portion. Mr. Henry is the chief of the Reservation Management Branch in the Facilities Information and Reservation Management Division of the Oak Ridge office under the Assistant Manager for Administration. In this position, he oversees activities on approximately 33,500 acres of land known as the Oak Ridge Reservation under the authority of the manager of the Oak Ridge office. He is also responsible for advancing DOE's reindustrialization efforts at the East Tennessee Technology Park and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where underutilized assets such as land, buildings, infrastructure, and equipment are transitioned to the private sector to accelerate environmental cleanup and promote economic development. Mr. Henry is a graduate of Tennessee Technology University and holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Tennessee. So we will begin with
We're going to start with Brian.
Okay, we're going to do it backwards again. You had me rehearse it one way, now you just... All right, Brian, you're up. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
All right, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the reindustrialization program and our transfer and lease processes. I always like to start with a picture of ETTP before and after and talk about the vision and mission of the reindustrialization program. We've been doing reindustrialization for about 15 plus years, and Oak Ridge program is recognized throughout the DOE complex as the leader, and we update our vision and mission about every 5 years. And our current one is by 2017, the Oak Ridge reindustrialization program will further its position as the model for sustainable, innovative reuse of DOE assets. And our mission is to apply our expertise to accelerate cleanup and promote economic development by making underutilized DOE assets available. That's land, technology, equipment, building, available to enhance the development of private sector businesses in the region. And I'm not going to read every slide, I promise. For those of you who aren't that familiar with the reservation, this is a picture of it. The area in brown we commonly refer to as ETTP, and that's where the bulk of the cleanup activity is going on for the former uranium enrichment program, or plant. And that's where the majority of our leases and transferred land are. What's in green is the Horizon Center. That was transferred back in 2003 for economic development. It was a greenfield. And what's in yellow is the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement. You'll see, let me figure out how to point here. Oh, okay. You got Y12, Oak Ridge, the spallation neutron source, and ETTP is in close proximity to the Tennessee Valley Authority land, where they're considering building some small modular reactors. Just a high-level overview of our lease process. As EM completes its cleanup mission out at the site, areas of land are cleared and available for reuse. The Community Reuse Organization, which was established back around 1995, they're the community's organization that is our point of contact for the reuse of DOE assets and former DOE assets. So when they look at what's becoming available, they'll put in a lease request. We'll take a look at that and try to establish a footprint. We'll work with our EM counterparts to make sure that they don't need that area to accomplish their mission for any reason. And then we'll set about discuss a target lease date and when we can make it available. We look at the area. We'll see how much it's going to take us to make it available for lease, what the requested lease term is, and the benefits to DOE to make sure that the lease is in the best interest of the government. We also have prospective tenants fill out an environmental review checklist and a hazard evaluation worksheet, and those serve a couple of purposes. That gives us an idea of what the company is going to be doing out there, what kind of chemicals and hazards are going to be associated with their operation. We use that to run our check under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. We use that to make sure that we're covered under NEPA. We also look at the ongoing DOE operations to make sure that the private sector company that's planning to come in does not have an impact to the ongoing DOE operations and the safety basis. So we use that information for those purposes. We also have to do notifications to the Federal Facility Act parties. We send a 90-day notification to both EPA and TDEC when we're preparing to do a lease. We also have to send notification to DOE headquarters letting them know that we intend to do a lease. While that's working, we work to prepare what's called a baseline environmental analysis report. And that basically takes all the information on the hazards out at the site, the information that EM has gathered in their cleanup, and puts that in a format and runs risk analysis to show that lease of that property for industrial use is safe for the industrial workers. And we provide all that information to the regulators for their review approximately 30 days before we prepare a lease. We also, sometime during that time frame, do our NEPA review and look at the National Historic Preservation Act to make sure there aren't any issues associated with compliance with that. We look at the operations of the private company to see if it's going to have any impacts on existing DOE permits. For example, if a company is coming in and there's going to be some stormwater discharge from the site, we make sure that that's not going to have an impact to our stormwater permits. That's just one example. If everything has progressed nicely as it should, then our real estate office will prepare the lease and sign the lease with Croat, and the land becomes available for the private sector. Moving on to transfers, the program focused on leases early on in the program, and at 2002, which was kind of the height of the leasing era, there were approximately 90 leases in place. There were 40 companies on site and about 400 private sector employees. Once accelerated cleanup began, 10 CFR 770 came into play that allows us to transfer properties. The shift went to accelerating cleanup the site and transfer of properties. And we can transfer properties out at ETDP under Circular 120H, and we basically have three pathways. One pathway is if we do the evaluation and determine that it meets the criteria for a clean parcel. That means that there's no contamination on that parcel that is to the level that requires or drives any kind of cleanup action. Then basically we obtain concurrence from EPA and then we transfer it. Sounds simple, but that two-block process generally takes us about a year. The other method is if it's an area of the site where cleanup is ongoing or the area has been cleaned up and there's been remedial actions taken. Since the groundwater is going to be kind of the last thing addressed out at the site, but we do not want to wait to transfer the land until that's been completely addressed. We do what's called a covenant deferral request. And under that scenario, we basically do an environmental baseline survey. We put together all the information and send that also to EPA and TDEC and get their approval. And then we transfer title subject to covenant deferral request. Most of the land at ETDP follows this path in the main area of the plant. We do have a few clean parcels that have followed this path. There's another path that you can take once the cleanup is complete and you're all done. We're not yet there, so we haven't transferred any land under that path. This is just a simple chart showing the different phases of the transfer process. The first phase is the request phase. The land out at ETDP transfers under what's called the 10 CFR 770 process. We do have other authorities, but at ETTP, that's the process that's used. So once a 10 CFR 770 request comes in from CROAT, or it could be another entity, we evaluate that and decide if we want to pursue transfer or not. If we decide we do want to pursue transfer, we move into the analysis phase. That's where we pull together all the documentation to support transfer. Early in the program, when we were kind of ahead of the cleanup, we would actually go out and take samples and have to develop the case for that property was clean enough for us to transfer. We're now to the stage where cleanup is caught up, and we typically rely on completed or approved phase construction completion reports where EM has went through, they've done the cleanup, they've submitted those reports to the regulators, and typically for what we transfer and lease today, those are already approved. We also look at the NEPA and the NHPA and all the other requirements. Once we do all of that, we basically send all that information to the regulators. We have back and forth with the regulators to make sure they're in concurrence with what we're transferring. And once we do that, we assemble a large package with a lot of information the headquarters likes to see. We send that up to headquarters for all the different programs to look at and concur upon. After headquarters blesses it, there is a 60-day congressional notification period that is at the end of the process. And then we finalize the transfer and sign the deed. This is a map that shows our current lease and transfers out at ETTP. What's in blue is land that has been transferred. We do have a couple of spec buildings that are on previously transferred land. CROAT and the city partnered on this one, and it's now privately owned. CROAT was the main organization responsible for the smaller spec building, and I believe it's still for sale if anybody needs a nice 14,000 square feet building. We do have some solar projects on land that was previously DOE owned that's been transferred. There's a solar installation here, and there's another solar project there. What's in green are the leased areas. Overall, we transferred about 700 acres of property. A large chunk of that is in Horizon Center, which was the green area on the previous slide of the reservation. About 200 acres are out here. We have about 300 acres leased, with the bulk of that down in the former powerhouse area. And we do continue to have numerous private sector companies. Babcock Services built a large building on our latest property that we transferred. And I want to say that was a $4 million building and is bringing, dozens of jobs to the community, but I forget the specific numbers. And that's basically it for me. I wanted to give you just a high-level overview of the lease process, kind of a snapshot of where we are today, and an overview of the transfer process.
Okay, ready for some questions here?
Sure.
Okay, David?
Mr. Henry, going back to the phases of transfer process, the second to last slide you had.
Okay.
Oh, next one. From the start, request from CROAT or from a entity, how long is the time frame from yellow to green? Generally, just ballpark.
Okay, in this request phase, by law, we have 90 days to respond to a request once it comes in.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean that we'll take the 90 days, but we have 90 days.
Okay.
Once we decide to pursue a transfer, for a clean parcel, our goal with our process is about 12 months. For a covenant deferral request, it involves a lot more steps. Our goal is 18 months. Because of various issues that have cropped up, our transfers that are in place right now are not meeting that. One of the things that happened recently is there was a new DOE order, 458.1, that required independent verification for parcels where there had been radiation.
Right.
That's a new process, and we're now having to incorporate that. We've pretty much got our handle on that now. So our goal moving forward is for new transfers, we would meet that 12 months, 18 months. There is work going on with headquarters. There's what's called the Asset Revitalization Initiative, and they've got numerous teams that are looking at different things. Okay. And one of the things being discussed there is how can we do better? Because the community's all, that timeline, when you're a private company coming in.
Oh, yes.
And you're waiting on how long can it take to get that property, 18 months, 2 years, 12 months is not a good answer. So we are taking a good look at that to
Good.
see if we can
Okay.
do any better.
Yeah, because that is critical to get a commercial venture into a building very quickly so they can start doing what they need to do.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Jimmy?
Two questions, please. On your last slide, if you go back and
Went too far.
tell me again about the blue areas. Is that property transferred? Who owns that property now?
Well, we transferred the property directly to Croat. Now, Croat in turn, they're trying to attract private sector companies. So some of the properties have been sold to private sector companies. So when you look at some of the buildings that were sold, this area right here, JMM Realty owns the building and some of that surrounding land. They also own this building, so they own some of this land here. The solar array over here, the company that does the solar array owns that parcel. Babcock Services, where they built their building, they own their little piece. So everything in blue has been transferred to Croat, but they have then sold some of those parcels to other entities.
So what happens if one of those outfits goes belly up and then that property is disposed somewhere? Is there preparation? Is there anything formally in there to protect that somewhere or another?
I'm not sure on what happened. It would go through a normal process just like anywhere else in the
But
city.
it's their property and
It's
they
their
can
property.
sell it the way they want to.
Right. Now, of course, all this property has deed restrictions, and we have land use controls and,
Sure.
and all that we monitor. But in the absence of that, it would be no different than any other piece of property.
And the property in green, which is just leased,
Mhm.
who leases that? Is Croat leasing that to someone?
Yeah, we, right now at ETTP, we transfer property and lease property directly to Croat. Now,
Okay.
Croat then works with the private sector and the economic development folks in the city to put private sector tenants out there. So we lease, DOE leases to Croat. Croat then subleases to the private sector companies.
Okay, would you go back to the first slide now?
Mhm.
And look at that one more back.
Okay.
I
mission
call
and
that
vision.
one the first.
Okay, yeah.
In the right hand, I thought there was a big building somewhere still on the K-25 site, and I don't see it on that
Well,
diagram.
there is. This is kind of our in-state vision, so to speak. So, this changes a lot. There's, with the historical MOA, there's going to be something in that general area. There are buildings here that USEC leases where they do. So K31 is still here today, but this was
Okay,
more or less
behind
like it.
K-31 is the big building, right there. Go on up a little bit to the right.
Here,
right there.
K33 is gone now.
It's gone.
Right.
Okay.
So is the image on the right a photograph, or is it?
No, it's a rendering.
Edited photograph?
It's a rendering.
It's a vision.
Right.
Okay.
Brian, you might want to point out 31 and 33 on the left.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So this was the 33 building. It is gone. So if you were to go out there today, it's probably not quite that green, considering the season, but that's in general
Is it
what it would
not
look
still
like.
concrete?
No. And this is the 31 building, which is still remaining.
Just the building itself, though, all the equipment within the building has been removed and disposed of for that particular building.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah. How do you see sequestration affecting your operations?
I don't really, what we do, is such a small part of the budget. We, of course, are impacted just like everyone else to some degree, but I don't really see it having a significant impact.
So is it the 5% that's basically hitting you?
As Sue mentioned, they're working with UCOR to determine the impacts, and that hasn't really rolled down to our level yet, so.
Okay. Bob?
Maybe this has already been addressed, but
I'm looking at your last image there, and was wondering, in the gray area, how long do you think it will take realistically to clear most of that and transfer it to private ownership?
Well, there are a couple things at play there. Part of it is the timing of when EM completes its cleanup, but in some of these areas, cleanup is essentially complete, and the trigger right now for transfer of some of these areas is for us to receive a request. So in some areas, for instance, down in the former powerhouse area, Croat leases that, and they're in the process of putting together a request for some part of that. Once they do that, then we're back to the 18-month type time frames.
I was thinking about some of the areas that have a good bit of groundwater contamination in them.
Well, right here is ED11 and ED12. Both of those transfers are in process. We anticipate the process to be completed on those within the next year or so.
Thank you.
Let's see. Any other from the board here? Any questions? How about from Susan? Ms. Garanku.
Hi, I'm Susan Gowerecki, and I had a couple of questions. There are, to my knowledge, at least a couple of companies out there who've been long-term lessees, M&EC and MCL Incorporated. And in talking to both of their principals, I understand that they would very much like to own the buildings that they're in, but there are issues with contamination in the buildings and apparently adjacent to them. How can DOE make a path forward to make it possible to keep these industries in those buildings?
My answer to that, I guess, would be to say DOE has had significant discussions with both parties in the past on trying to see if there was a path forward on that. To date, I don't believe we've found a path forward on that, and I'd like to defer to Sue, because I think she could probably answer that better than I.
Sure. So with regard to the two tenants that you mentioned, MCL is currently leasing Building 1006, and they are a laboratory. They provide laboratory services. And what you said is accurate, that they do have contamination within their building, which makes it extremely difficult for us to be able to free release the building under DOE requirements. One of the requirements placed on the department to be able to transfer a building is that we have to show that there is no radiological contamination or other contamination that cannot be free released under our own standards. So because of the former use of that facility, there's suspected contamination, and in some cases confirmed, that has gone through the ventilation system, and it's not practical to be able to free release that building. So that's the challenge with that facility. With regard to the facilities in the 1200 complex, or the former centrifuge facilities that M&EC lease, there's been lots of discussion with them, and they don't have so much a issue with regard to contamination within their facility as much as indemnification issues. And so that's been for years the difficulty in overcoming those issues, because they are a waste treatment facility that has been operating under state-issued radiological licenses, as well as under RCRA Part B permits for the handling of hazardous waste. It's very difficult for the department to extend indemnification. And that, of course, is something that company would need in order to be able to have the property transferred to them. So they're each a little different in terms of what the challenges are, but that's just a quick summary.
Do you foresee overcoming those challenges, or are they just going to be put out of their buildings when it's time to tear those down?
Well, we certainly have no interest in just putting them out of their buildings. That's, the purpose for reindustrialization is to help to diversify the economy with private sector investment. And we've been working for quite some time, actually, with MCL on options available to them that would allow them to still remain at the Heritage Center. So there's been multiple discussions and many offers to try to come to an agreement whereby they may not be able to stay in that building, but we would certainly like to keep them there at the site. With regard to M&EC, there's still, I guess, some hope that maybe they can overcome the indemnification issues, but short of that being plausible or possible, I would expect continue to work with them as well to see how we could keep them at least within the region.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. Let's see. I had a question about the proposed airport, which roughly parallels the turnpike and would possibly take some of the blue and some of the gray areas there. Have there been any discussions about locating this, or have you not been talking to Crowett about it?
Well, as far as the airport, we are aware of the studies that have been going on and the favored location, so to speak, and there have been some initial discussions on the transfer process and with Crowett about the airport and other folks just about the process. To date, DOE has not received a request for the transfer of property for an airport. When that happens, of course, we'll take a look at it and evaluate it and work through that.
And is that
I can add to that. It's in part also because the airport authority is still doing their study of the area to determine if they want to proceed to the next step.
Right.
Okay. And I know that Impact Services leased a facility both at Horizon Center and at Heritage Center, but the one at Heritage Center had gone hot, and that company went bankrupt. Is DOE involved at all in the cleanup or looking at what's going to happen with this, or is that basically out of your hands?
I think I'll also defer to Sue on that question.
So that property has been transferred to Crowett, and Crowett was leasing it to the company that has since gone bankrupt. And that property was operating under a state radiological license, and there was a bond that was required as a part of receiving that license. And so the state actually has jurisdiction because the property is not owned by the department and is proceeding with doing their investigation and determining what the path forward is. The department has supported a ongoing investigation by another entity with regard to some characterization work because the department had sent some material to that company for processing and treatment. So there has been a very minimal amount of support that the department has done to assist this other agency with the investigation that they're doing. But again, jurisdictional responsibilities as well as the responsibilities for determining the path forward really lies with the state of Tennessee.
Okay. All right, and I guess I'll just wrap up with, you talked about determining if a lease is in the best interests of the government and looking at what activities might take place on it. I guess this is for both leases and transfers. But how do you handle this when it's prospective, like the spec buildings, and you don't know what the ultimate tenant or buyer is going to be doing on the site? How do you factor that into your work?
Okay. The land is transferred with deed requirements that limit it to the activities covered in our EA, the NEPA documentation. And so what we did when we did NEPA, we basically did a bounding analysis. Because of that uncertainty, you don't really know what specific type of industry will be there. So we started with the city's basic zoning, industrial zoning categories and what was allowed under that. And in the NEPA analysis, it evaluated the worst case type scenario. And so there is a deed restriction that says any use now or in the future is subject to that. So we continue to monitor any proposed use, whether it be for transferred property or lease, to make sure that it's in compliance with their NEPA.
Okay. However, that was not your policy in transfers at Horizon Center, where there were similar deed restrictions referencing the EA land uses.
That was our policy at Horizon Center also, and when a new use that was going out there, we looked at our NEPA to make sure it was consistent with that, and we continue to do that.
Yeah, no, I remember there were some, certainly some issues around impacts work out there, because that would have been waste disposal, which had been prohibited in the final EA.
I'd be happy to talk with you offline about that, but that use was evaluated against the existing EA. We did a white paper on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bob?
Has Croat, any of the holdings that you've transferred to Croat, has that had, any of it had contaminated groundwater?
Yes.
The property transferred to Croat, yes. Was the question property transferred from Croat to the private sector, or?
No, to Croat.
Yes, yes.
How does Croat handle that?
Well, one of the things, of course, DOE is still pursuing its remedies for groundwater, and we transferred the property over a covenant deferral request. One of the things we have to show in transfer or lease is that, based on everything that's known, that property is safe for industrial use. So we have lots of data that basically says, for whatever use that Croat is going to use it for industrial workers, that property is safe. Now, Croat's challenge is when private sector companies coming in and they have concerns from perception, convincing them of that. We, over the years, have done things like we called it radiation in perspective. In this case, volatile organic compounds. We did a fact sheet and a pamphlet that talks about VOCs and puts it in perspective to the type of stuff you find out in normal industry. So, we've done that and worked with Croats to make sure that they're armed with the information. So if someone comes in and has a concern, they have the information ready at hand to show that the property is safe for industrial workers, and they can talk them through it.
You might want to mention as well that the deed restrictions you've mentioned several times, there is a restriction placed in all the deeds that use of any groundwater is strictly prohibited. So the tenants are not allowed to install wells or to withdraw and use that groundwater.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Are the tenants in the future perhaps liable to clean that groundwater up?
No, with the property that's transferred, DOE offers indemnification related to any legacy contamination. Now, for the property we transferred, of course, the cleanup has been done, and if there are any actions resulting from the groundwater that DOE is still obligated to do, DOE would go in and do that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions here? Brian, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Ms. Jackson, you're up. The Director of DOE Procurement and Contracts Division, there are $3 billion of financial assistance awards.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you this evening. Before I get started, I do want to introduce to you a person who did come with me, Karen Shears, who is the branch chief of the Special Acquisitions Branch. Thank you, Karen. Just to get started, I do want to talk to you about the overview of the DOE procurement process. And this is basically the process that all federal agencies use in order to award contracts. Just looking at the flow down of the contracting authority, starts with the Secretary of Energy down to the DOE Senior Procurement Executive, who is at headquarters. His name is Paul Bosco. Going from Paul Bosco, the authority goes down to the head of contracting activities. And here in Oak Ridge, we're very pleased to have several programs that we're providing services for. We have the EM HCA, who is at headquarters, who is Jack Sarash. We also have a Science HCA, who is headquarters, whose name is Joe McBrearty. The procurement authority flows from the HCA down to the contracting officers. And we do have contracting officers here in Oak Ridge who are responsible for awarding, administrating, and also closing our contracts here. The contracting officers here in Oak Ridge are, I call them multi-program contracting officers because we support many programs here in Oak Ridge, being EM Science. We also support national security functions, nuclear fuels, and not only do we support contracts that are locally here in Oak Ridge, also we have the opportunity of supporting our science labs here in Oak Ridge at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, as well as the Stanford site office in Menlo Park, California, the Pacific Northwest Laboratory in Richland, Washington, as well as the Thomas Jefferson Lab in Newport News, Virginia. The DOE procurement rules and regulations. The federal acquisition regulations, it's a single regulation that is used by all federal agencies, whether it's DOD, DOE, DHS, all federal agencies are required to comply with that basic federal acquisition regulations. And then all agencies also have a supplement. That is, we have the Department of Energy acquisition regulations that gives us additional procedures to use in order to award, administer contracts. And from the DOE acquisition regulations, there's also a thing called a DOE acquisition guide. So we do have a lot of policies and procedures that we use to award and administer contracts. This just shows you the level of our authority here in Oak Ridge. We have contracting authority for actions that are equal or less to $25 million. We go to Science, Joe McBrearty, or EM Jack Sarash for those actions that exceed $25 million, and their authority is from $25 million to $50 million. And then the Office of Acquisition and Project Management, again, Paul Bosco's organization, we would go there for those actions that exceed $50 million. Small business participation. The Oak Ridge Reservation, the Oak Ridge office, we're very proud of our participation with small businesses because our mission could not be accomplished if not for the small businesses that we have here helping to accomplish that mission. We have implemented this year from headquarters a small business first policy. That is for all procurements that are equal or valued at more than $3 million. If you're not setting those aside for small businesses, then we have to go to headquarters to explain why we're not doing so. So at Oak Ridge, we have always known that we could not accomplish our mission if not for our small business contractors. Now, the DOE procurement process. And I'll talk a little about each of these on upcoming slides. But basically, first, we have to identify requirements, and that is an office such as an EM office, Sue Cange, would come to us for any requirements that she would need to have a contract placed for. We would help define the requirements, conduct market research. We go through an acquisition planning process, request proposals, evaluate them, and award. And we'll talk about each of these on the next slides. Identifying requirements. In order for us to help each office be prepared for its upcoming requirements, we always have a 3-year planning forecast. We've already now gone out for 3 years to say, program office, EM program office, tell me what are your needs for the next 3 years. And we do that because we want to make sure that we have the resources to help identify and plan those requirements. That's our procurement forecast. And also we update that annually. Defining requirements, we work with the program offices on drafting a statement of work. That's the document where they define what services that they need to have done by contractors. There's also a requirement for an independent government estimate. That too is prepared by the program office, and that government estimate is what we use to help us evaluate those proposals when those are received. Drafting evaluation criteria for all requests for proposals that come in, and that is how we do get our services. We send out a request for proposal, which includes the statement of work. It includes the evaluation criteria. That evaluation criteria might include technical capability. We want to evaluate key personnel, corporate experience, and we also always evaluate past performance. Funding is very important. We want to make sure and work with the office to ensure that there is adequate funding for the requirements throughout the years. And draft acquisition plan. That acquisition plan is called a strategy document, and that really helps us to work with the office to make sure that everyone understands what is the need and how will we procure that need. What type of contract are we looking at? Will this be a contract that you may need for 3 years in order to procure your need, or will it be a 5-year contract? Should it be a full and open competition, or is this something that we can set aside for small businesses? And we do this by conducting market research. Market research that's what it is. We go out and look for capable resources. We do this in several ways. We may have some history of firms. There are also firms that come in and market our offices. We also look at what information may be available in different databases. There are different ways to conduct market research, and we make sure that we use all of those ways to do that. There are also opportunities for firms to come into our office and tell us about their capabilities. We might have conduct one-on-one meetings with firms. We might have pre-solicitation conferences. That is, before we send out a solicitation, we want firms to come in and tell us about their capabilities. We might have meetings with firms for them to help us learn more about how we can better procure the services. And sometimes we even send out draft proposals, and that gives us an opportunity to send it out to companies for them to tell us how we can better prepare the RFP to get the services that we need. Again, this is more on acquisition planning, and these are some of the elements. The elements of an acquisition plan are those standard elements. Those are included in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, where we look at the performance period requirements. Are there any ways that we can possibly streamline the acquisition? We also look at competition. Is there justification for a non-competitive? And there usually is not. Most of our procurements are competitive. What should be the contract type? Should it be a firm fixed priced contract, or should it be a cost reimbursement contract? And then what are the benefits of contractor versus government performance? Does the government have the resources in-house to actually perform this service, or do we actually need to go out and compete for a contractor to perform the services for us? The request for proposal. The request for a proposal is prepared by the contracting officers in my division. In the request for a proposal, you would have the statement of work as one of the main features. You would also have that evaluation criteria that I'm talking about. You're evaluating key personnel, evaluating the technical capability, evaluating corporate experience, past performance. The source evaluation board would evaluate all of those factors and use that in selecting the firm who would be actually the successful offeror, that is, who would win the contract. And proposals may be solicited from one or more companies. It's just based on the results of the market research. Again, this is on evaluating proposals. We talked about those elements that would be used in evaluating proposals. And these are pretty standard elements that we use in all of our RFPs. That is the key personnel, the company experience, the technical approach, and we're always required to evaluate past performance because we're looking for quality proposals, quality firms to conduct the work. Awarding the contract. Most of our contracts, well, all of our contracts are based on best value. That is, it's not the lowest price. We also always consider the technical expertise, the technical capability. So a firm may be the highest score, and it may be the lowest price, but we have to consider if it is a higher price than another firm, then we consider what is the trade-off. Is that difference really worth the additional expertise that we would gain if that price is higher? There's another method called the lowest price technically acceptable. With that method, you would determine of all of those technically acceptable firms, we will select the lowest price. So that is two methods that are used to award contracts. You are probably familiar with a lot of the contracts that we have here in Oak Ridge. All of you know, of course, the UT Patel contract. You know about the UCOR contract. Those are some of our larger business contracts. And then some of the contracts that we have awarded include the WAI, which is a small business contract. You are probably familiar with the SEC. It's a contract for EM cleanup, Ladder Sharp. Some of our other contracts here you're probably familiar with are the ES&H, that's a contract for roads and grounds. We have contracts for administrative services, IT contracts that are small businesses. As I said, we have many small business contracts here. And just to give you some numbers from just tracking our small business accomplishments here in Oak Ridge, in 2009, we had contracts awarded $230 million. In 2010, $274 million. That was a lot of our Recovery Act funds. In 2011, $49 million. In FY12, $95 million for small business accomplishments. Also, some of you may be familiar with last year, headquarters did not have a DOE-wide small business conference, but NNSA and DOE, we teamed together here, and we did have a summit in Knoxville, which was quite successful. And with that small business summit, we were able to have over 750 participants within that organization. So that's some of the accomplishments that we have in the small business area.
The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.